There's a theory about COVID-19 that the US cooked it up in a lab and planted it in China as biological warfare. There's another one that China cooked it up in its own lab and unleashed it on their own people, which seems kind of stupid, and then it got out of the country. These ideas are both wrong, but they're both useful as IQ tests. If your friends believe them, get smarter friends. But there is another of these myths that I'm going to sell you as the truth. And it doesn't come from medicine. It comes from psychology. One night in a dark lab in the basement of a building in Rochester, New York, a mad psychologist invented a concept that would infect the earth. The psychologist's name was Carl Rogers, and the idea was unconditional positive regard. Rogers was a psychotherapist at the time, and he was interested in what makes therapy work better. And he'd noticed that if a therapist was grossed out or angry or rejecting when a client told him something, the client became less willing to open up and share stuff. I know, it's the revolution. So Rogers decided that part of a therapist's role should be to adopt as broadly accepting a manner as possible. A good therapist wouldn't just smile and be nice whenever the client did something right or something the therapist wanted them to do. He or she would have an open and accepting style, whatever the client did. Drank that week, didn't drink that week, got a DUI, whatever, right? That style of respect for the person, not necessarily the behavior, but the person, wouldn't change depending on what the client did. It was unconditional. And the idea would be that this would help the person feel open and relaxed and be able to share more and explore ideas that might otherwise feel threatening. And in the long run, they'd be more likely to take positive steps in their life. And he called this style, again, unconditional positive regard. Positive regard that was not conditional on the person's behavior. Okay, so I'll skip to the conclusion and say that this idea caught on and is part of the foundation of most psychotherapy. As far as we can, most clinicians try to practice this. Now, let's be clear, it's not that we don't care what the client does. If they want to overcome anxiety, say, then the way to do that is to gently and gradually face our fears. So if our client comes back and says, no, I didn't try walking past the dog park this week, a part of us is really thinking, shoot. But if we're pushy or unpleasant about it, this only slows things down. We're not mad at the client. We're just thinking, damn, I thought that would work. Long story. So, unconditional positive regard turns out to be useful in therapy. But one night, Rogers forgets to close the vent in his lab, and unconditional positive regard leaks out into the broader world and starts infecting people. And they begin talking about it as a central right that people have in relationships, which Rogers never actually said. Unconditional positive regard is a tool. It's not real. When your buddy borrows your wallet and spends all your money, do you feel exactly the same way toward him as you would if he hadn't done that? Of course not. At some level, you still have the awareness that this is a complex human being with hard to understand motivations and difficulties. He's still a human. But do you feel exactly the same way? No. If your partner sleeps around behind your back and you find out, do you still feel exactly the same way about them that you did before? Of course not. Not right then, anyway. But if you watch carefully, you'll see all kinds of people who believe that others should accept and love them exactly the same amount, regardless of what they do. It's like a fundamental human right that isn't written down anywhere. I have the right to behave literally any way I like, and including in ways that affect you. And you should not only act exactly the same way with me, you should feel exactly the same way too. If I give you a terrific birthday gift, you should not feel any greater warmth toward me than if I ignored your birthday altogether and told you I hate the way you eat, because that would be conditional. The problem with believing in unconditional positive regard is that it sets expectations of others that they simply cannot live up to. And neither can we. We do feel different depending on what people do. Even mothers of innocent newborn babies do not feel exactly the same way toward those babies 24 hours a day. If the kid is screaming for 6 hours, the mother is still going to care for her child, still feed it, still change it. But is she as thrilled about this little darling as when she had a good night's sleep? No, no, she's not. So what happens if you expect unconditional positive regard from people and they don't give it to you? Well, they've violated your rights. They've shown you that they don't think you're worthy of this basic element of all human relationships, supposedly. So what do? Well, it's tempting to cut them off. You are no longer my friend. I don't want to have anything to do with you. But think about that for a second. If you're cutting off a relationship because somebody does not show you unconditional positive regard, that means that your willingness to be there with them is conditional on their behavior. Feeling annoyed with somebody for not showing you unconditional positive regard is not unconditional positive regard on your part. Proof that you can't do it either. So, how to be miserable in your 20s or 30s or any time for that matter. Believe what you've been told. Expect unconditional positive regard in all your relationships. No one will live up to it, and you will be mad forever. You'll cut people out of your life, and your anger will hide from you what they can see. Your love for them was completely conditional on them behaving in a way that humans simply cannot manage. All you have to do is ignore the truth. There is no unconditional positive regard. You will never fully succeed in providing this, and you will never receive it from anyone. Not your parents, not your siblings, not your friends, not your spouse. Not even, if we're honest, from your therapist, who will smile and help you to investigate your anger toward her, your perpetual lateness, your texting of friends during a session, but who is, if the truth is known, sometimes secretly gritting her teeth. The mission of life is not to find unconditional positive regard. It's to let go of that quest. We can work at creating in ourselves as broad and accepting an attitude towards our friends and family as we can possibly manage. And we can refrain from rejecting them when we're frustrated and tempted to do so. We can even look for people to populate our life who will cut us some slack when we're not at our best. All of that's completely reasonable. But looking for unconditional positive regard? That's the way down, not up. Tolerance, kindness, understanding, and yes, unconditional positive regard are admirable aspirations. But that last one, unconditional positive regard, it's just that, an aspiration, not a reality. It takes time, but we can eventually get used to the fact that we won't ever really get it.